Oh my goodness, I just met such a cute guy to introduce you to. I don't recall asking you to matchmake. Fine, but wait until you see his outfit. It's so handsome. If you say so. Where is he? It's a dress. I know! He's obviously someone important with a good job. No way he could be a farmer in a tunic that long. And just imagine how much more that extra fabric must have cost. You don't seem all that excited. How about you go flirt with him? Something tells me we wouldn't have much in common. This video is me shamelessly reusing some research I did for my offline life. Last year, I went to a weekend-long folk dance event, and one of the organizers said to me as I was packing up to go home, "Next year, want to teach a workshop about skirts?" Now, to explain why this was even a thing, I should tell you that this particular form of folk dance has a long history of men as well as women casually wearing skirts because you get to twirl a lot and it's fun. The class I was asked to teach was on skirt wearing for people who didn't grow up feeling like skirts were an option. Starting from what's the difference between a skirt and a dress, and going all the way through different fabrics and cuts to using skirts to play with social ideas of gender and silhouette. Since I'm teaching outdoors with no AV equipment, I'll be bringing a huge suitcase full of dresses and skirts and changing clothes about 1,000,000 times to show examples of how different styles and fabrics move. But all this got me thinking, what is the deal, historically, of skirts being for women? Why do I even have to teach a class on skirts for everyone? Part of this event is that everyone contributes in some way, whether by volunteering or teaching a class or helping other people get there. It's cabin camping and not everyone has gear or sleeping bags, so there's always a call put out for folks who can lend out spare bedding. And thanks to this video's sponsor, Brooklinen, I get to help keep my fellow dancers comfy and well-rested between days of dancing our feet off. Brooklinen makes luxury sheets and home textiles that are worth investing in. It comes up often in fashion history that textiles are really resource intensive to produce, so it's the best thing for the planet and one's budget to have well-made bed linens that will last a long time and be comfortable their whole lifespan. They do gorgeous seasonal colors, like this bright, fresh blue mist shade. It's crisp and cheerful, but not too strong, so it won't clash with the new bed curtains I've gotten in a deep forest green. You can mix and match over 20 colors and patterns, and the Luxe Hardcore bundle I got costs 20% less than buying the core sheet set, a duvet cover, and extra pillowcases separately. The Luxe Sateen fabric is 480 thread count, made from Okeotech certified cotton, and has an amazing soft sheen to go with the gorgeous colors. They're smooth, soft, and have a buttery drape rather than the over-crisp texture I found in some lower quality cotton shades that makes me feel like I'd be sleeping in paper. It's not quite warm enough yet to switch over to linen, my ride or die for warm weather, but I always sleep cozy in these without overheating since they're breathable natural fiber. Over the years, I've ended up with a collection of my favorite colors in Brooklinen sheets, so I can leave this set on my bed for when tired post-camp V gets home and needs a nap, and still bring a couple sets for other campers to use. Brooklinen is offering my viewers a special discount of $20 off any order over $100. Just click the link here and use code SnappyDragon. Let's begin by defining our terms. First, a little disclaimer regarding gendered terms in history. There have always been human beings that didn't fit neatly into society's gendered boxes. However, fashion has always been one of many ways that societies represent and reinforce gender roles. I will be using the term menswear and womenswear to refer to what gender presentation is attached to a piece of clothing by the society it's worn in, not because a piece of clothing can inherently have a gender. That's the whole point of this video. And in order to talk about skirts and who gets to wear them, we should first agree on a definition of skirt. It may seem a bit condescending to do this on a fashion history channel, but please bear with me, I promise there's a point. As I was starting to work on this class, I said in the presence of a longtime dancer friend, I don't know why I am the one teaching this, I am of a demographic that's socialized to wear skirts. My friend, a non-binary male-assigned individual, said, when I started wearing skirts, I did not know what the difference between a skirt and a dress was. So, Clearly, a definition has its uses, especially for anyone watching this video who has not been socialized to skirt wearing. A skirt is a garment for the lower body that has one segment rather than two separate legs. The word skirt may refer either to an individual garment that only covers the lower body, or the lower body section of another garment like a dress. A dress is a skirted garment that covers both the upper and lower body, usually attached or one piece, but sometimes two pieces meant to wear together. Does that sound like a solid definition? Can we agree that this is what a skirt is, even though different varieties of skirts may have more specific names? You're not teaching a class. They can't answer. Oh, yeah, right. Well, we'll just assume they get it. Now, let's pull in some examples from the fashion history. This 1950s style with the poodle on it, that's a skirt. This Edwardian fashion plate, also a skirt. This bustle dress, this 18th century gown and petticoat, still skirts. You follow? This medieval dress, that's got a skirt. What about this other medieval dress? That's got a skirt too, right? Yeah, this is William the Conqueror. You know, the Norman king who is famous for conquering England with an army. Anyone want to tell me that what he's wearing doesn't fit our definition of a dress? So here's our first issue with the idea of skirts being for women. By the definition we set out, this guy is wearing a skirt, or a dress, but you understand. Medieval Western European fashion is the direct ancestor of Western fashion today, and medieval European society imposed far stricter gender roles than the modern world. This dude was a king who was famous today even for military conquest, so what's he doing in a skirt? Even if we start within the relatively narrow confines of medieval Western European fashion, it's not that there was no variation. Regional ways of making clothes would be different, and just like today, individual people would have had their own preferences for what they wanted to wear, and their own methods for making it. But the most common outfit for men in this setting? Not trousers, that's for sure. We have a couple examples of Norse trousers from the Viking Age, but not a lot otherwise. The most common leg coverings for men were hose or chausses, tall stockings that covered the feet and legs made from wool fabric, cut on the bias so it had some stretch to fit well. These would be kept up by tying them to the drawstring belt of the braise, drawstring waisted underpants made of linen. And over that, a knee-length garment with long sleeves that could be called a kirtle, a tunic, or a variety of other terms depending on region and language. Now, based on the definition we agreed to earlier, that's a dress. You know there's gonna be some guy in the audience saying, it's shorter, so it's not a dress. Don't worry, I am prepared. Let me show you some full-length examples, and if you want or need source notes, you can find a full annotated bibliography on my Patreon. There are at least 2 images of William the Conqueror wearing an ankle-length dress or tunic with a pinned cloak in the Bayeux tapestry, including the one we saw earlier. Likewise, that page of the Codex Manesse I showed earlier, if I zoom out to show you the whole thing, also depicts men in full-length dresses. The Moorjam Picture Bible also has plenty of examples. The working class men are wearing shorter lengths, more like mid-calf, and the higher status men in ankle-length tunics or dresses, often with surcoats or overdresses. Full-length garments were often associated with status, age, or learning, as they were less practical for manual labor. Wearing garments one couldn't do labor in was inherently a way of showing off your status, but it was also that full-length garments used more fabric, and fabric was really costly at this point. Everything from spinning the threads to weaving the cloth and dyeing it had to be done by hand, without mechanized production or modern fabric dyes. Garments like this funerary hoopland, a 14th and 15th century high-status overgown, showed off the wealth of the wearer by using huge amounts of fabric carefully draped in voluminous folds. This one was made for the burial of John, Duke of Görlitz, and hastily constructed due to his sudden death in his sleep, but it's still made in carefully draped, full-length, elegant folds of velvet. Again, this 100% fits our definition of a dress. It's not that trousers didn't exist. We have examples of trousers from Viking Age Scandinavia, but they were a less common option for menswear outfits rather than being the rule. Heck, if one goes back to the Roman Empire, that's a thing men think about, right? Why are you asking me? I'm not a man. No, but given what you said in our Valentine's Day video, you have more to do with men than I do. Can we not talk about that on camera? You're the one who brought it up. Not today, I wasn't. Fine. But do they? Because all my information on the subject comes from memes. Anyways, trousers were considered barbaric by the Romans. Barbaric as in foreign, uncultured, and low class. The warmer Mediterranean climate around Rome didn't require leg coverings, and since all cloth had to be spun and woven by hand, it would be wasteful to cut the more complicated shapes necessary to make trousers. This is a pattern I've seen often in warmer regions of the world. Wrapped and draped garments are more common because they suit the environment well. So, the Romans, seeing themselves as the pinnacle of culture, saw the Germanic tribes and their trousers as being ill-mannered and un-Roman. As the power of the Western Roman Empire waned and influences from conquered tribes made their way back into Roman society, trousers shifted from being seen as un-Roman to being a practical element of common soldiers' clothes, as shown here in Trajan's column, from the early 2nd century. A late 4th century sumptuary law restricting which social groups can wear certain clothes, banned the wearing of trousers and boots within Rome. Often, sumptuary laws are an indication of certain styles' popularity. Why bother to ban something no one is doing? However, historians more familiar with the period than me have interpreted this specifically as a way to keep ordinary, unoccupied soldiers out of Rome during a time of social unrest. Meanwhile, Roman influence in fashion has made its way to the rest of Europe, even in women's wear. The peplos, a Greek and later Romanized style of overdress, was worn as far away as Britain and possibly Scandinavia. Likewise, trousers were less commonly worn, being replaced by separate hose. What happened, you ask, to make trousers the norm for Western European menswear? The Renaissance, basically. During the early Renaissance, and particularly in Italy, a fashion emerged among wealthy younger men to wear shorter and shorter tunics or doublets. So short they would show the wearer's brays, since tall hose or chausses only covered the legs themselves. To go with the shorter doublets, joined hose developed. Imagine tights, but made of woven wool fabric cut on the bias for a little bit of stretch, rather than modern elastic materials. Some men still preferred full-length garments, as shown in many examples. Please, let's not talk about the codpieces. I'm sure there's no way to discuss them without getting demonetized or someone acting like she's about 12. Joined hosed were well established by the end of the 15th century and began transforming into something more like trousers than tights in the 16th. The upper sections of joined hose might be decorated with slashing, cutting slits in the fabric to show a contrasting layer underneath, or paned construction, using many narrow strips of fabric with gaps left between for a similar effect. The Kleidungsbuchlein, by an accountant named Matthäus Schwartz, gives excellent examples of the transitional period between the tights-like styles and the later ones. It is also a fascinating bit of fashion journalism written by a guy who just seems to have truly loved interesting clothes and was fortunate enough to be able to invest in his hobby. This guy commissioned upwards of 100 watercolor images of his favorite outfits, including a delightfully snarky one of him having been so ill as a toddler he was thought to be dead and sewn into a shroud for burial. He advises the reader to do the same as me. I moved 1 foot. Hose continued to increase in volume until it was more common to wear a looser or fuller set of short hose called Venetians, trunk hose, slops, etc., depending on the specific style, over fitted hose or stockings. By the end of the 16th century, most doublets had only hip-length skirts, and pants of some kind were required, well established, and would form the foundation of Western menswear from then until the present day. Now, let's step out of the narrow confines of Western European fashion and look at literally the entire rest of the world. My primary focus is Western fashion, so I may not be able to describe styles from other areas with the same level of detail, but it would be downright negligent of me not to mention them at all. If I talk about anything from your culture, dear viewers, and you feel so inclined, please do tell us more about it in the comments. All right, so the moment you look outside of modern Western Europe's sphere of influence, there are menswear skirts everywhere. To the point that when looking up a certain garment by name, I encountered variations of it ranging from North Africa to Indonesia. Turns out, in many Southern Hemisphere climates, wrapping a large piece of fabric around yourself is an especially practical way of doing clothing. There are ways of wrapping a rectangular garment that pass between the legs, like trousers, such as the South Asian dhoti, and I highly recommend at Mr. Makwana on Instagram for some amazing examples of dhoti draping. However, while one could argue that dhoti are a form of wrapped trousers since there are two separate legs, the sarong is definitely a skirt. I think most of us will have seen some version of the Southeast Asian women's wear sarong, although Western cultures often borrow the aesthetics for beachwear without much of the context. However, there are a huge number of menswear sarong styles, both in Southeast Asia and throughout the Southern Hemisphere. The mundu is a wrapped skirt from southern India. This image shows the Keralan variation. The izaar is one of many regional names for wrap skirts worn in Yemen. While we're in South Asia and North Africa, the thawb, or dishtasha, is a traditional full-length menswear garment, and it is yet another that fits our definition of a dress. My knowledge of Japanese kimono is very limited, but this appears to be another garment where full-length skirts could be worn regardless of gender. As far as I know, the gender-related variation is more in the sleeves, the sash styles, and the colors and patterns of the material. These are just the examples I know of, and my knowledge is far from comprehensive, so please do go read and contribute to those comments, because I am sure there is more out there. But menswear skirts are not limited to the Southern Hemisphere or the distant past. Who here has seen a kilt? I'm just gonna presume everyone has their hands up and carry on. The modern kilt is an adapted and updated descendant of medieval wrapped cloaks. A cloak doesn't look much like a skirt, yes? But remember all those rectangular wrap skirts we saw from warm climates? This is the cold weather version. The transition happened at some point in the late 16th century, when an English writer noticed Scotsmen wearing their mantles belted around their waists to form skirts, kilts, rather than covering themselves over the shoulders. These great kilts were often made from two lengths of narrow woven wool, 24 to 36 inches wide, sewn together along the selvage to make a wide rectangle. After a period of being banned in the 18th century, part of England's suppression of the Scots, the great kilt with its large upper section wasn't as practical for indoor or industrial work. So it was adapted first by removing the top section, then by stitching the pleats in place. The modern kilt is seen everywhere from traditional Scottish formal wear to fashion kilts like the Utilikilt. It's not the only menswear skirt still in use in the West either. The fustanella is a style of skirt originating in the Balkans, part of Greek and Albanian national dress since the early 19th century. It's usually around knee-length, pleated, and extremely full. My friend Pesky, who you may remember from a previous video where we made a huge mess baking in Victorian aprons, is of Greek ancestry and was kind enough to share this photo of her grandparents for an example. Pesky tells me fustanella are also part of the Greek presidential guard uniform. She showed me a clip of their very elaborate changing of the guard ceremony, which certainly shows the fustanella to advantage. There are several reasons I rarely talk about menswear. The first and foremost being that I don't wear it and I sew mainly for myself, so I have less reason to study it. But beyond that, for the last couple of centuries, Western menswear has been, for lack of a better word, boring. In the late 18th and early 19th century, a shift took place in social norms around Western menswear called the Great Male Renunciation, which would make for an entire video all on its own. If you're interested, you know what to do. Even though skirts were a good 3 centuries out of common use in westernized menswear, a lot of the visual interest that remained through colorful materials or embellishment was relegated to women's wear. But over the latter half of the 20th century, and increasingly so in the past few decades, color and variation has been finding its way back into menswear fashion. First, it was the counterculture influences of the 1960s and 70s. High fashion looks seem to have been extremely bright, even if mainstream everyday menswear remained more subdued. And now, since the 2010s, more and more color is making its way into everyday menswear, while the high fashion stuff is finally starting to experiment with garment shapes. Many viewers will be familiar with Billy Porter's gorgeous velvet tuxedo ball gown, or Lil Nas X's fantastic toile-patterned 18th century hoop skirt. These particular examples have an incredibly rich and layered social context, both being worn by queer black men to hugely publicized events. But we're not just seeing high fashion menswear skirts that are a social statement. They're making their way into runway fashions too. I rarely pay much attention to 21st century high fashion, so please do forgive my relative lack of context. Designer Thom Browne seems particularly well known for menswear skirts on the runway. Several examples from the spring-summer 2018 collection are very structured, using the crisp materials and sharp tailoring often seen in high fashion suits to integrate them with more traditional pieces. Skirts over pants are also common, such as the Givenchy Fall 2023 menswear collection, and considering that a long tunic or robe over trousers is a staple of traditional fashion in numerous places, I'm glad to see runway fashion remembering how well it works. There's also a lot of tartan patterns, pleats, and wrap fronts. Since the Scottish kilt is such a well-recognized masculine coded skirt, calling back to it in other menswear skirt styles is a way to make them a little more approachable. So, here we have it. In much of the world, throughout much of human history, skirts were not just a women's wear item of clothing. A piece of fabric does not inherently have a gender. How clothes relate to gender will change based on the society they're worn in. There have been times and places where all genders wore similar styles of skirt, where there were different styles of skirt depending on gender, and like modern Western fashion, where people of all genders wear trousers. These days, so much of Western European fashion is considered the norm that people living in Westernized cultures are often never required to think beyond it. But Western European fashion moved away from skirts as menswear century before it started colonizing and developing an outside influence on the world. Gender's relationship with clothing is contextual and squishy and not the same everywhere. Just like other aspects of gender and gender roles are contextual and squishy and not the same everywhere. So frock the gender binary. Dress up in whatever makes you feel delighted and comfortable in your gender and all its complexities. And also, frock the idea that wearing a certain item of clothing has to say anything about your gender. You can be a man in a skirt for no reason other than you feel like wearing a skirt. Honestly, frock the idea that you even need fashion history as a justification to wear clothes that make you happy and disrespect no one. The point of wearing interesting clothing is that we find it fulfilling, whether it's to show at a glance who we are and what we're about, or for the simple, pure joy of twirling in a big skirt, or a little one. This is why I was asked to teach the class, because that joy should not be restricted. Skirts, just like dancing, can and should be enjoyed regardless of gender. And if I can move the world a little more in that direction, I will consider it a very worthwhile effort. To that end, you can find my class notes on my Patreon as bonus content. You can also sign up to get benefits like Discord membership to come hang out with me and other excellent costumers, my source notes, and monthly video calls. Tell us in the comments about your favorite skirt or a skirt you might like to try wearing if you haven't yet. Don't forget to click the button to tell YouTube you liked what you saw, and subscribe for your regularly scheduled dose of fashion history sass. You can find me around the internet at SnappyDragon on Instagram, Facebook, and very occasionally TikTok. Thanks again to Brooklinen for keeping me and several of my fellow dance campers in the most comfortable of bedding. Brooklinen is offering my viewers a special discount of $20 off any order over $100. Just click the link here and use code SnappyDragon. Speaking of, this one and I have got packing to do. See you next time! Why do I have to help pack? I want to go to dance camp too. You're literally me. You are going to dance camp. But we don't exist off camera, so really neither of us is going to dance camp. Now you're just coming up with reasons not to help. Come on.